I'm Jeremy Fritzhand, and tonight we're going to be joined by Monica Moisin of the Cultural Intellectual Property Rights Initiative. Thanks everybody for continuing to join us on Sundays. This is going to be a continued series that we'll do every week. YouTube will have links to these, as well as a podcast that is released each week. So, welcome, Monica.
Hello, Jeremy. Hello, everyone. Good to see you again.
Yeah, nice to see you too. So, I was just letting everybody know how this is now our weekly live stream and subsequential podcast that you can listen to after we post on Instagram on our YouTube channel. So, as usual, I would like to, welcome Monica again. And how are you doing this week?
Oh, it's been a tough week here, to be honest, on my end. A lot of work going on. It's not easy to cope with lockdown, especially when your freedom of movement is so much restricted. I think I don't know how different lockdown measures are implemented by different states, but where I am at the moment in Romania, I'm missing nature and I'm missing this connection to nature a lot.
Yeah, it's taken something away, like when we're not able to walk or but at the same time, it's really the quiet has also, at least here, like the birds are so clearly chatting away during the day.
Yeah, that's something that I could observe here as well. I can hear the birds. I planted a few plants on our balcony, on my mom's balcony, and then we have a few insects coming to visit, and that's lovely.
Awesome. So, Monica, why don't you introduce the topic for this week?
So we thought about talking this week. We thought of talking about how do we measure impact in the craft economy. This is a subject that comes up quite often. What is impact, and how do we measure it?
Sure.
So many perspectives, right?
Yeah. When we look at the last 50 years and in India, I guess after independence, and we saw more sourcing from Europe and US, North America, Australia, the trend was always towards a production metric. And through the 80s and 90s, as we got the large retail corporations that were pushing more and more consumption, because eventually they became public companies and were trying to improve their bottom lines and ensure that the shareholders were happy with their earnings reports. We saw these metrics focused on a production centric model.
Yeah, so this production consumption-centric model is one way of approaching the craft economy, and for India, it seems to have prevailed in the past over 50 years. I had the chance to read a few, to expand kind of my knowledge in this field in the last months and weeks, and got an interest into seeing this high. I mean, the question was at the beginning, why is craftsmanship so differently looked at in India, as opposed to, for example, Italy, Netherlands, the UK, where crafts has somehow a status of luxury. One explanation can be, and some academics have put it forward that this would be this exact approach to the craft economy from a consumption production perspective, where we want to produce more, we want to sell more, and by doing more, we create a competition for price. What is the lowest price that you can get, which in turn, devalues the value of the craft itself, because we create a competition of who can make it cheaper, and sell it, rather than who creates the most beautiful thing, the most valuable thing. It ends up reducing to a discussion of price, not necessarily a discussion of value.
Right, and so when we think about the metrics that are being used, and obviously this production consumption metric is not actually the most the way to reach a homeostasis, so to say, in trade and consumption and sourcing. So I guess, right now we're kind of in these renaissance and revival of craft in India, at least in the last 10 years, since the fashion revolution movement started, since the consumer started to realize this model was not ethical, moral. And now we are facing a global crisis, which is farther instilling this idea of a flawed system.
I think this is a very good question, that comes here is, are people still really living in that paradigm of production consumption, or are we ready for the fashion revolution paradigm? Let's call it fashion revolution, because that marked a different moment. There is another theory researchers promoted that talks about different waves of craft revival, and one of them, the third wave, would be the one where we take into consideration ethics and ethical perspectives. Are we really in that wave or not in India?
So to say, the cultural values, a value-based craft economy.
Exactly. Are we really in a value-based craft economy or not yet? And I think this is something that we can't answer, really. It would be necessarily to have, more people engaged in this conversation, more people on the ground, more designers, producers, companies in India saying, where are you? Is it your primary concern to produce more? Be honest, no problem, but we need to know which kind of wave are we in? Because if we are the only people who talk about the third wave and just 1, 3, 5 other projects who, are in this wave, it isn't a problem, but we are a minority, and it's fine. It's fine to know that we are a minority. It's really like this exercise of understanding where are we in the world today. Consumers, not all the consumers are on the same wave of the ethical consumption patterns. So if they are not there, obviously the producers are also in the ethical production pattern, because they don't have whom to sell. If they have people who still request the lowest price, this is why we need to have, a coherent action plan across all levels of the supply chain to be able to transition from this simple traditional economics, if you want, paradigm for the craft economy to this more inclusive, holistic, human, ultimately, paradigm that is called the value-based approach, which is something that you are part of. Studio Bagru is actively part of a value-based approach to craft.
Absolutely, and since I've met you and you taught me about these different metrics that are necessary to really determine whether or not the model is, so to say, sustainable, or the wave of the future. The cultural value aspect of the craft is something that a lot of people forget about. And craft is a very hyper kind of local entity. No matter where you are in the world, when we talk about craftsmanship and the evolution of craft, using your hands to make something and mastering that, is something that happened over tens of generations.
100%.
And just recently now we're seeing, in the span of less than one generation, this is all broken down. The failure, we're witnessing the failure of that economy.
Exactly. We have witnessed it so clearly in India, especially with all these calls for aid, all these campaigns that are asking for help, that they are asking for donations. What kind of paradigm is that? We are talking about people who make things with their hands. We are talking about people who, if they would be given a piece of land and, that has all the natural resources, would be able to survive. We are not talking about people who are stuck in an office, and if you leave them, without access to primary sources, they would die not knowing how to boil an egg. We are talking about people who know how to survive, and they are asking for help. They are asking for aid. We see all these aid campaigns. This doesn't make sense in this doesn't make sense in the whole idea of trade, right? So these people know how to make things. They know how to survive. They have just not been paid what is rightfully theirs because of this year-long competition on who makes it cheaper. Because, it was a global politics scheme or not, or however, globalization.
The growth of corporate fashion.
Exactly. So now
it run its course. I mean, this is how, the bubble, so to say, bubble has bursted. And now we have this also global event that is making people reevaluate the consumption habits, the system as we know it, and which I think actually, on a positive note, a lot of these people are extremely resilient. And resiliency is something that will endure and enable the survival of these traditional knowledge. It's a collection of skills and...
That's an excellent point, and Jeremy, this is amazing. Like, what we can learn from these communities are lessons of resiliency. It's ultimately what keeps us going as humans is resiliency. And if we would be more open, all of us, not just, the people engaged in this conversation or the people who are participating in this live debate, if we all could be more open to these lessons of resiliency that we get from traditional communities all around the world. I was reading actually from this anthropology book. It's actually like the basic book that you get on a first year
Anthro 101
study. Exactly, it's Anthropology 101. It's called Small Places, Large Issues. And there's a quote here, by Marshall D. Salins, and it goes like this: "Money is to the West what kinship is to the rest." I think we have all reached that point where we realize that our lives are all about how do I produce more, how do I get more money, how do I make myself successful, and so on. When in fact what we need is strong relationships. We need to have people from whom to learn. We need this intergenerational connection. We need all these things. That craft ultimately is the most tangible example of that. Because where you still have, when you still transmit knowledge through crafted experiences. You have all this like high quality of life englobed in textile crafts. It's a beautiful metaphor of how to live better. And
definitely. I mean, there's a romantic view of fabric and textiles. Totally, the warp and the weft axis, the vertical and the horizontal axis, and then the weaver as the third dimension, and bringing this all together into a fabric that clothes us and covers our body, adorns our body, which makes us different from other creatures on this earth.
Exactly. And I don't know, I just had a bit of inspiration for another session that we could do. It's been on my mind for a long time. How many metaphors connected to weaving or to textiles are there in the world? We talk about social fabric. We talk about weaving our destiny. We talk about, the Greeks have all these metaphors for different aspects of life that are all connected to weaving or to textile.
Universal energy.
So ultimately, I think what we wanted to do today, right, was to discuss about this transition from a simple production consumption paradigm to more than that. And
right. And actually, we have a comment here from Sean Bunsell, which is "Money to the West, what kinship is to the rest," which is a perfect quote that you mentioned, kind of tying it all together.
So the name of this guy who wrote this quote is Marshall D. Salins. We'll make sure to quote this in the description of our talk this week, and maybe leave it as a food for thought for how can we transition now, right? It's a moment of disruption. It's a moment of change. How can we rally together and advocate for this idea of switching from this purely economic production consumption paradigm to this value-based approach paradigm to craft economy, where we talk about cultural, spiritual, ecological, economic values together, not simply economy, production and consumption.
Yes, and I mean that's also, I think, both of our organizations are working towards ensuring there's resources for people to utilize, to understand how to make these judgments or research before they make their purchases, which it all comes down to the consumer, which is shaping this entire market. The consumer will become more educated, and the resources must be available so that they can make these educated decisions.
Definitely. And it's ultimately, no matter how we try to, because a lot of questions now are about when can we start production again? People are obviously thinking about the immediate need that they have. However, I think as long as us and all those who are engaged in conversation with us or part of our networks agree tacitly or expressly to adhere to this value-based approach in their own internal processes, right? Then these values will be reflected in their work. And we don't have answers for everyone. We don't have answers for everything. What I know is that I took a public commitment and a commitment to myself in the first place to look at this space, the space of craft, from a value-based approach, and to act in the space with this value-based approach in mind. And the moment you did that, you're already 7 steps forward. That was a random number, but you're many steps forward. You're driving the discussion in the direction, and that's where the future can be. It's a long process, but we
all have to start with these small, conscious decisions.
Exactly. Do we have any questions from the audience? I wonder if anyone wants to engage today.
Yes. Do you want to do a little recap for everybody, Monica?
Definitely. So today was a bit of more like a let's say thought of life and the direction in which stream of consciousness. What we talked about today was that that reality, that paradigm in which production and consumption were the main metrics driving the craft economy has shown its worst face.
Run its course.
And has run its course and has shown that it peaked with the pandemic and with this massive need for help. If this is not a cry for help, what is it? This is a cry for help.
It's a failure of a model. And now we have to realize that.
So this model has failed. We all know. We all see it. Some of us are hanging with our teeth to this last chance. How can we start? We cannot start in the same way. There's no future in the same paradigm. What we need is to understand that we need to transition to a value-based approach to the craft economy. And an approach where cultural, spiritual, ecological, economic values are all taken into consideration. The first step we can do is acknowledge the necessity to transition. And the second thing we can do is to meet like-minded people and share how do we integrate this value-based approach to the craft economy in everything we do. You know, how do we do it? At Studio Bagru, we see how you do it.
Yeah, exactly. These relationships that we're building in the parts of the traditional supply chain or the modern supply chain that we look at as a structure with different people and processes, we have to realize that the hands that are going into making things are equal partners as anyone else involved. And yeah, back to the point of this value-based craft economy, these cultural values, the traditional knowledge of these communities, and the intangible values that we have a hard time explaining, which kind of, it's hard to really describe.
No, it shows the complexity of the matter, right? Like we cannot oversimplify this space to just factors of production and consumption. This is the reality. We have so many one day maybe we can talk about all the difficulties that we face, and me and you and other people like us working in this space. The variety of difficulties coming from understanding what do we want from each other, coming from understanding the meaning of the craft knowledge for that community. Like for some of us, it can only for many of the people in the world, it just means they are doing that to earn their livelihood. But if you ask the community, for many of them, it's an inherited practice. It's sometimes it's even considered a practice given to them by the gods. So when you have that understanding, when that's your cosmology, things are at a totally different level. So just limiting it to factors of consumption and production is definitely too much simplified. And if we can conclude one thing, at least this one, that we have oversimplified the craft space. And we need to start being more conscious and looking, at least accepting that it's not as simple as selling bread.
Absolutely. Exactly. Totally. So thanks everybody that's joined us this today for our discussion, and thank you so much, Monica.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, for another very inspiring and uplifting conversation. It gives me great pleasure to see you every Sunday and discuss all these brilliant topics.
Absolutely. I look forward to another episode next week. And if you're interested in re-listening to this, you can find it on our websites. There'll be a link to a post. Otherwise, we look forward to talking to everybody next week. And have a great day.
Have a great day, and let us know what you think about a value-based approach to a craft economy. Is this a possible reality for the future or not?
Leave your comment down below.